Hi, everyone. Welcome back to an episode of the Precursive Perspective. Happy Friday. Unless, of course, you're listening to this on a Tuesday, in which case, what's going on in the future? Welcome along, Vijay Ladwa. How are you, sir?
Good, good. I'm in sunny Warwickshire. Thanks for having me on.
Sunny Warwickshire for our American cousins or European cousins joining in. That's somewhat north of London. Warwickshire, famous cricket team, obviously, I think.
Famous cricket team, Shakespeare.
Shakespeare, what was born there?
Yeah, Stratford.
Of course. Yeah, yeah, very good, very good. Love
I'd
it.
like to caveat this. I've been living here for about 10 years. I'm from London. I'm still using my sat nav to get around. So I'm still, I,
Love
I
it.
don't claim to be an expert in Warwick.
All right, good stuff, man. Well, listen, it's great to have you on. Really excited about this. Obviously, you and I have got to know each other since I think, what do we meet up at the Pulse conference in November, right? That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's customer success. So sort of gate crash that one as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Did you come along to my talk? Was
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Standing
okay.
room only. So yeah.
Standing room only. That's true. That's true. Well, they wanted to hear what all the fuss is about, and then left disappointed. I'm sure. All right. Well, look, give us a little bit about your background in your career, then.
Yeah, what can I say? I've come from a technical background. I was a software engineer way back when. I did a couple of degrees, bit of consulting, but then I think I got my sort of proper software job at Lockheed Martin, and that's a defense contractor. And that was kind of when Agile was kind of newish. Yeah, and I started off as a software dev, and I was a Scrum Master. And me for to be a glutton for punishment and work in different time zones, I was a UK based Scrum Master leading a team in the US in Orlando, which
Ouch.
was great. Certainly opened a few doors. And for my trouble, I flew out there for probably about 2 years. They put me on this Lockheed Martin leadership development track, which is,
Nice.
I had to sign an EU waiver for the amount of hours they had me working because I had to do my sort of program work plus all my leadership track. And, that was my first sort of training. I never used to like doing any of those sort of trainings, but this was like going back to university again. So doing your program work, and then moving around the business, doing different roles. So from project management and, getting the theory on that as well. So, yeah, it was a great time. And, being sort of, was it 20, 21, 22? All expenses paid, living the dream, right? Going to Miami every weekend. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
Airplane movies.
yeah, yeah. So traveled all around the States working on simulation and all this tech stuff.
Yeah.
But like I said, got my first sort of touch of sort of leadership. You asked me then, I'll probably want to be a CTO. But I kind
Right.
of moved in my career a little bit and fast forward a few years and yeah, sold my soul to Accenture. I had a microchip put in, cut my teeth in the sort of consulting background. And then I was sort of tech, so I could move across all different industries. And I was doing different roles of leading delivery for government projects and leading BAs and all sorts. And
Yeah.
yeah, I started off on those big projects, massive machines, but then I started seeking out these smaller ones, like in digital, like with the Discovery Channel and some of the digital supermarkets in those days were sort of going sort of online and things. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like the Amazon era. Yeah, so in those places, it's like going into startups every time, but you're a small Accenture team going in to grow business and backs against the wall kind of thing, working with a good BA, and it's just three of you, nowhere to hide, right?
Right.
Um, Jumping into red programs. So no, it's brilliant. And yeah, so I got introduced to the world of startups. Worked in different domains. So joined a sort of health and safety startup. We ended up selling that twice. I was a project director by then, so I was
Yeah.
running projects,
Yeah.
but I still had that software background. So I was actually being pulled in to run parts of the roadmap as well, which was quite interesting. And in a startup, if you've got the skills, then go do it. And if you want to do
Yeah.
it, you've got a lot of room to move. And I've moved meandered between startups, scale ups, and enterprise businesses as well. And, after that, going into I think this is probably, yeah, I was working for private equity, so this company buying up software verticals, initially coming in as head of PS. So same sort of bag as project delivery, software. But my first 6 months, I should ask more questions in my interview, was being in charge of a restructure to consolidate the delivery function and turn them back into profit.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I think that was a 3-year transformation journey, pulling in introducing the company to customer success and service delivery management as a whole. So the
That's
whole
Infobit, right?
no, that was before that. That was
Oh,
with
okay.
Tech. It's a 30-year-old shipping company. I
Oh,
never
wow.
worked in shipping. I come from Air Force, right? So different domains. So yeah, I had to kind of get into that sort of crowd as well. But open my eyes about sort of talent and investing in people and things and restructuring and stuff.
Mm,
And then yeah, joined a startup then. That was in the AI space, head up delivery there and scaling them up. And then Infobip came knocking.
mm,
And that was a company, never heard of them, billion-dollar unicorn in Croatia, fascinating company. And yeah, that was I was coming in as one of the sort of external hires for professional services, which hadn't sort of been fully rolled out yet. So everything was being done by pre-sales. And this was a company substantially enterprise, but hyper growth. I mean, I've seen startups move like that, but not enterprise. So you're doing transformations in that and delivering to customers. Every day is a school day, but really great experience there. Yeah, and that brings me up to today, right? So
yeah. Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love the diversity, right? Like, I
yeah,
just think that diversity in people's careers is seeking that out is something that I always did when I started in advertising, then I moved into recruitment, then I moved into consulting and then this. And it was always like try and do something different because it just broadens that your business acumen and your curiosity and needing to learn an industry. I think
yeah,
that's so important. I think I'm not sure if folks really understand that these days, what like enough, because kind of there's a tendency sometimes people will be like pigeonholed, either they get pigeonholed or they pigeonhole themselves. But anyway, um look, one of the reasons why I was like really interested to get you on is because you got that blend of the consultancy background with the big machine Accenture and then running services within a tech business. And um I think that blend of experience is highly valuable, particularly like depending on if you're moving
I
either.
found it valuable.
Yeah. Good.
The one tech guy in the room, right?
Yeah. Well, so, and I just think, you and I have talked about this, about like the convergence between these worlds, right? And within the industries themselves. So take me through or take us through your thoughts on how you've seen the world of consulting and PS evolve in recent years.
Yeah, I think, and this is not, it's probably from when I first started out, it was about sort of delivering. It wasn't about sort of necessarily the value. It wasn't articulated to me at that time. It
Yep.
was, delivering billable hours or a deliverable, right? A piece of software. So it's a
Yep.
one shot. And that was these long projects. When I was a project director, it was like managing monthly, projects lasting months or even years, right?
Mm.
Deploying across vessels, multi-month or multi-year
Yep.
project. But that's it. See you later. And then you're slapped with a support fee, which is the recurring revenue, but all you're getting is sort of bug fixing, nothing else, right? So
Right.
I've seen this sort of one-shot piece, and what I'm seeing now is more on that consultative selling piece. That was them so selling hours and things, and I think it's more of a case of sort of selling the value of what you're trying to deliver rather than the sort of number of hours. I think businesses are kind of like increasingly sort of focused on, what am I getting out of my sort of SaaS subscription? What other value adds am I getting? And I think it's more about delivering business goals than rather than selling them pieces of software or features now.
Yep.
And I think essentially it's like customers want SaaS products now or have, but they also want that SaaS experience with that. And I think that's where the services and consultancy piece kind of have
Yep.
meandered into sort of one shot into a continuous engagement philosophy, or if you want to call it a philosophy model.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's totally fair, right? It's kind of like it's moved away from being like long term but transactional, right? To
Yeah.
the idea of this continuous value delivery, which is a bit, I don't know, fancy words, but that that really describes it. So the thing that I'm seeing is like software businesses, embedded services teams within software companies looking to have much more control and discipline, right? The biggest trend
Right.
that I see is like this, the path to profitability as an example, right? Now in consulting, if you're not profitable, you're kind of out of business, right?
Very
So
quickly as well.
So expand on how are consulting companies being influenced by SaaS in your view?
I would say it's recurring revenues or consultants now, because it is a monthly engagement because they've got a SaaS product. They have to continuously show their worth effectively, and that can be in different forms, right? That could be advocating new packages or advocating best practice, but it's not this one-shot piece. It's this sort of continuous engagement through managed service. It could be sort of upsells and cross-sells. So these consultants or consultancy is now more of a case of being the trusted advisor, not just there to do that one shot. But I think it's a continuous, so similar to SaaS on a monthly subscription basis. I think consultants need to show their value on that kind of cycle as well.
Do you think though, is there a significant mindset shift, do you think, for some traditional consultants to move in that direction?
I would say so, because it before it was more of a case of coming in, not showing people how to do their job, but showing how to do something. Whereas now it's forward thinking, building that sort of program of work, or program of engagement, as you will. Adoption. Are they getting more value on their initial investment of this product? I think that's part and parcel. But I think consultancy can go into so many different areas of that journey, and it's up to the consultant now to map out that business value. And make sure that customer is a customer for life and not just this whole one-shot piece.
Well, enter one of the drivers of enterprise value in consulting firms is rebook rates, right? Reoccurrence, which is like sort of combined with that client NPS type score. So no, I hear you there. Going the other way then, when you moved into, like, take that Infobit role, right, for example. So when you moved into a tech company that had a lower level of maturity in services, like I'm guessing that you brought quite a lot of discipline and rigor to it and structure to it. What is it that like SaaS companies or software companies generally can learn from the consulting environment? So we've talked a little bit about what the other way. So
right. No, I think there's quite a few different areas as well. So potentially going to a tech company, it's very delivery focused. Implementation, I call that sort of tapping keyboards. It's quite low on the value chain. It's probably seen in a product company. It's probably seen as like a means to an end. I think it's it's getting them into consumption. It's a good model, but you're leaving money on the table, and this is where consultancy sort of comes in now. I think the biggest thing consultancy coming in, using some of those lessons from consultancy, is that value-based selling, not just features, but real business outcome. I think you actually move up the value chain and start building out packages or certain different service areas. And I think opening that area in a tech company, because the resource there are technical, but they are naturally trusted advisors. No, it's just honing that in. I think that was one of the key pieces at Infobit, putting some rigor into that sort of value-based selling, rather than just hours or one deliverable or milestone at a time.
I mean, the thing that I think about just or that's come to my mind there is that the typical thing that software vendors will do is if they're sophisticated, if they've got any degree of sophistication, is they'll be talking about the role of customer success in pre-sale, right? So for example, you might have a customer success manager. They're going to do X, Y, and Z. They're picking up the baton in the customer journey here. We're going to do A, B, and C for you, right? Now, I think the challenge for many, particularly if you're looking to stand up more of these offerings, right, and monetize it, is actually sort of migrating from that to something that's monetized. So I think that there's a challenge around either, because if you've got that embedded sort of mindset in the company of like you've done it that way and then you're introducing it, it's quite a shift, I would imagine, to change it over time. Or you've got to be much more sophisticated in terms of how you introduce it, that idea of additional services actually in the pre-sale cycle as value add, right? Which is, I'm guessing that's.
Yeah, and I think it ties in. Sorry?
Do you see where I'm coming from on that?
100%. And like I said, there's so many different stones you can turn on this. Part of it is just that orchestration of what it is to be a customer. So, that customer journey piece. So now introducing new services at the right point for that customer. Where
Yeah.
are they on that journey with you? Have they just onboarded? Do you wait 6 months and then start introducing new packages and services? Segmentation on the customer. What type of where are they operating, and what are those business goals? I mean, it is quite, it can be quite basic, articulating that customer journey. It could be just who does what, where, when. A lot of companies, everyone's running around like a five-a-side football team, and you've got a customer in there. And I think that's a piece of orchestration that should happen when you're trying to layer services on top of the product.
Yeah.
So I think the whole solution layer you're developing, and communicating, leaning on customer success,
Yeah.
support. I mean, it's a whole holistic approach.
Yeah. No, that, I mean, that feeds in very nicely to the sort of the transformation experience that you've seen, right? I mean, you've talked to me before about that orchestration and not sort of biting off more than you can chew, of like sequencing it or
Yeah.
choreographing it and what you commit to. So given you've been through that transformation initiative, well, actually, maybe tell us a little bit about like the in the last role, just to frame this, could you give us a little bit of an overview about what did that transformation initiative entail over those years, like sort of, because you've broken it down for me before, just maybe do that to begin with, and then we'll talk about the learnings.
Yeah, so I mean, I could probably draw upon sort of SpecTech and sort of InfoBev as
Yeah.
well. Similar sort of states. Um, for services was effectively a means to an end. At SpecTech, services was run at a complete loss.
Right.
And with InfoBib, it was a case of breaking that customer journey out across the dedicated departments, rather than everything being done in sort of pre-sales for free. And then there's no value in that services. So part of it was mapping out those sort of objectives of what you're trying to achieve, and then orchestrating the sequencing of what's going to happen when and how that is communicated. Even SpecTech, I came into that organization thinking I could get them from straight project management or straight projects to service delivery function, which is proactive, within a year. It took me 2.5 years, and that involved creating global service hubs and consolidating that down. So it is tough, certainly rewarding, but I think the key takeaway if anyone's in that sort of situation, is to sort of embrace the sort of getting it right the second time. There's so much that can happen because you've got customers you have to deliver to in the meantime. This is all
Yep.
internal. So I think, in SaaS PS, perfection, I've never seen it. Perfection on the first try is quite rare, I think, and I expect challenges and complexities. That's something I picked up from Valaris Group, that PE company. I mean, this was at a bar with one of the CEOs, cornered me, and they said, Vijay, you got to make a decision. What's the plan? And it was so complex. And they said, look, just put the plan and make sure you got your pivot points in, and make sure that you got some sort of measure to know when to pivot if things don't go right. And I think that whole getting it right second time is so important, that the goal is to sort of iterate, improve, and learn, and foster that environment of, you can make a mistake, but you better be sure you've got pivot points in there. So I think this whole transformation, it's quite easy to say, right, we're going to do this from the start, and we're going to get to this end time in 9 months and run it like a typical old school project. But I think in this space especially, getting it right that sort of second time is more important than trying to hit it first time. I think even just breaking it down into smaller iterations like software. So leaning on my software background as well, there's small chunks, quick wins. That's probably the safer way to do. And you'll find out more stuff. I think bigger the company, the more comms you have to do, or the more dare I say politics to be done as well, right?
Yep.
So
No, I'm laughing because like I'm living that
yeah, everyone
right
has. I
now.
suppose everyone on
I'm living that
your
right
whole audience
now.
has probably gone through that.
And I think that's actually quite reassuring, because I think you kind of set benchmarks in, or at least I do, and that's one of the things I've learned running a small business is you set this idea in your head that you're going to get it right the first time, and then you're like, oh, we've failed, or that person's not worked out, or they can't do it, we can't do it, and it's like, hold on, actually you've got to be a lot more measured and realistic, because if you think everybody out there is getting it right the first time,
Yeah.
And I think the more that I talk to people, when you've like folks like you with experience, particularly even in much bigger companies, they're getting it entirely wrong. I've seen this with a customer like recently. Like the person that brought us into this particular company was looking at monetizing services, right? And so they were bringing in Precursive as a PSA solution to help them do things like the resourcing and manage the costs and track the margin that they hadn't done previously, right? Now, part of that was like selling packages, like their initial selling of packages. And that person left the business after about a year. The new person that's come in, so this is probably 18 months, circa 18 months after that first person started. So we've been talking to that person, and it's exactly the same job spec as that person 18 months ago. Exactly the same.
Same conversations as well.
Same thing, because evidently
different toilet.
sales of those services offerings didn't transpire or happen within the time range that this particularly kind of like aggressive culture business wants to happen. And it's like, well, actually, you're probably going to get it right the second time because you know more about those things. So I think that's going to be a little motto, I think, for the Services Delivery Alliance, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, I think so. And it actually took me, a while to get that. I've come from an engineering background. I want to get it right first time. That's how I was schooled, right? You have to be precise, right? And it's only when I had these some good mentors about, I hate to use the word strategy, but it was strategically planning pivot points and knowing more. You always find out more. I think that was a good lesson I've just carried forward. It took me a while to grasp that one. I'm not ashamed to admit, when I was a lot younger, I used to spiral into analysis paralysis, right? And it's there's so many books about that. But until you're in it, and you actually see, a lot of people, they learn by doing. At Infobip, that was one of our mottos, is learn by doing. And that was the great thing about that company, is everyone's so proactive. They want to try everything new, sometimes too quickly, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we're seeing that a little bit as we look to grow our services as a service. So what we call services recurring revenue, so SRR, right? That you talked about. And
copyright pending, or
I'd like to think so, Vijay. I'd like to think so. I'm going to be banging on about it a lot, so I might have to trademark something. Maybe banging on about it as a phrase will be what we have. But I think I'm definitely seeing that, because we're getting into the conversations about it, but we haven't quite reached the level of maturity in that area versus actually the selling of our software. So our sort of software sales is a bit ahead of our managed services sales. And I think part of it is you sort of have this assumption that because it's a client, there'll be this pull through and this recognition, right? That, oh, we need this. It's like, and to us as vendors, it's like, these guys definitely need this. Like, there's continuous improvements, but you're going to need. But actually, again, helping them understand that, like, the pain of same versus the pain of change, or like the value of that, it's, again, that's been a sort of a big learning for me. You're really passionate about people, and you talk to me about how you've, like, some of the learnings in adjusting your management style and things like this. So given that PS is underpinned by people, right? Talk to me about this area, right? Like share your thinking around this, the frameworks that you use, and what folks need to appreciate if they're really going to build up the talent in their organization.
Yeah, I think nurturing talent is something that has certainly become a passion over, as just becoming a leader, managing lots of people. Something I didn't think I'd be doing 10, 15 years ago. And I think that comes from just my training. And I won't say it was intense training at Lockheed, and we were schooled, and it was a very forward-thinking company, still are. And we were schooled on effectively holding people's careers in your hands, providing that sort of sandbox and giving them room to experiment. And I think that's that's that X factor of finding those diamonds in the rough. I think getting someone promoted or giving them additional accountabilities. It sounds all mushy, but that's some of my highlights in terms of achievements and things. But I think my approach to sort of just managing talent or building up talent or pipeline is very holistically. Anything from talent pipeline. I like to call it a fat bottom, especially in PS. So we talked about packages and moving up the sort of value chain.
Yeah.
So, building out a good sort of intern program, something that Infobit were really good at. So it's basically cheap people doing cheaper work, and you build them up, creating those destination companies, because it improves your margins that way as well. I think defining roles, career paths, making sure that not consultant could just be lumped in. I was lumped in as a consultant, but within Accenture, I did 15 different roles: delivery manager, quality assurance, you name it, still lumped as a consultant. But I think having defined roles of principal, senior implementation consultant, it helps you sort of differentiate your service as well. You can charge different rates.
Yeah.
Career paths. I've gone into organizations where the only sort of way you're going to earn any more money is, and the only promotion path is manager. Well, a lot of my sort of peers do not want to be people managers. They want to be principal architects and things. So having that sort of career path put out. So I think there's a lot of again, lots of things you can do. There's not one silver bullet. I think communication, expected behaviors, that sort of thing, showing what sort of good looks like. I don't think anyone sort of goes to work saying, I'm going to do a bad job, but if you don't show what's expected of you and when you do something, and again, pulling into that sort of customer journey, who does where, what, when, expect mixed results if you don't do it that way. And I think, yeah, it's not rocket science, but I think, again, communicating, training, looking at your skills matrix, resourcing. I mean, these are all standard professional services, schools of thought. But
Yeah.
every time I go into a company, it's kind of half done, especially with PSAs. There's always a resource module. Is anyone using that to its fullest and showing where skills are? And
does anyone actually know how to resource though? That's the other big issue, right? There's a big difference by having we have a resource manager, or that person does resourcing, but if they don't, like, that's a discipline. That's like HR business partners, finance business partners that I've worked with, like in past in bigger companies. Like, it's a discipline, and therefore there's a lot of folks don't necessarily understand that. They don't understand what demand forecasting is, or if you've got your sales, you've got your backlog, you've got,
is there buffers in there? How much of that is book and earn? How much you just, in your forecasting, how much don't you even know about? That's just going to happen every month because that's your normal business, that you're going to have these transactional projects. And I think with talent, just assessing the performance of individuals, again, working with HR, again, with Valaris Group, during that restructure period, I worked side by side, global HR director. I learned a lot from her. But again, in assessing that, and nowadays people want more from their companies as well. So I think looking at sort of internal engagement, or CSAT, as you put it as well, I think that's fundamental as well. When I was coming up, it was about delivering objectives, do a really good job, and you get your bonus. I think certainly what I've seen the last 3-4 years, especially during COVID times, people are sort of expecting more from their employers as well.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think the roles and the expected behavior and the role description is something where it is a moving beast as well, right? It's a moving target. Like, going back to your get it right second time, I think one of my observations is, like, you go down maybe one path and that doesn't quite work as you thought it would. And is it the path, or is it the people who are walking the path, or is it a bit of the two? And it's super, and having the self-aware, like, literally part of the reason why I was a few minutes late was I was talking with my wife, who runs people for an event business. And I was trying to explain this. I was asking her opinion on it. Like, is it this, is it that, is it this person not doing their job, or is it the strategy? And it's all of those. All of those things together. And inevitably, I think in PS in particular, you're coming in, you're inheriting a team, you're inheriting a methodology, you've got the product that you've got, right? And so that's an evolving thing. Your product, your people, right, is an evolving piece. And that's why it's so, I think, fascinating in a way, and challenging, because talent management, the other dynamic to it, talent management in PS, is that you may well have one of the biggest teams in the company.
And that is normally the case, because and you're responsible for making sure that you're either driving consumption or making sure they're using the product. You're that, like I said before, potentially a necessary evil if you're not selling your services properly and turning a profit. So you do. At SpecTech, I incorporated support. So I was handling all of support as well as success and PS. It was the whole service piece.
Yep.
Big team, but nurturing leaders in there as well.
Mm.
Some great leaders in there. But I think just to your point about is it the person, is it the sort of objectives? I think potentially you have to have the sort of the hard metrics as well to drive the behaviors, not just have sort of KPIs for the sake of KPIs because you've seen it on a white paper that yeah we're going to have to sort of measure that and that's going to drive up productivity and people are going to be happy about that. I've incentivized it quite simply. I've gone to extremes where I've shown my KPI, my bonus model effectively, and I've cascaded that down to my team. So,
Yep.
and then my managers will cascade theirs to their direct report. So
Right.
everyone, I'm not successful if my team aren't successful effectively. But I think, and I don't expect my manager to do that, but I'll certainly do it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think my at Valaris, my manager, well, he wasn't even my manager. He was like the COO of Valaris Group for development plans.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a manager and your direct reports didn't have development plans completed correctly and to standard, it
Mm-hmm.
would go against his KPI. And now so can you imagine him calling you out and he's literally holding your career on that KPI.
Yep.
So it just shows how talent is looked at now. It has to be done correctly. And CEOs, CEOs, they have their part to play in that as well.
No, no, I agree. I mean, in some cases, I think the just one final thing on that though, like sometimes like the framework of that performance development is overly complicated. I think
Yeah,
it's like
it can be.
particularly if you've got someone who's maybe underperforming in role, it's just like let's get you to the baseline because there's no point in us worrying about the future if you're not at the baseline, right? And we need to agree on what the baseline is, or to a certain extent, you're going to need to accept that if you're working for someone, like there is an expectation of what the baseline is by your manager or the company. Zeroing in then on some of the metrics. So, what are some of the metrics that matter when it comes to measuring the health and the performance of a services business?
This might even be controversial, I'm not sure, but I think we mentioned it before. We talked about engagement, just on talent, we talked about engagement. I
Yep.
think for me, and this is a shift, right? I've gone from utilization, it's
Yep.
ENPS, so employee net promoter score, engagement. I think when you mention sort of people are the fundamental to our business, I think that is one of the sort of KPIs that I look at now, never used to, just because sectors moved on, is making sure that we've got an engaged workforce. And I think it kind of lends itself to, people expect more, but I think it lends itself to that old adage, and it's quite simplified, but happy employees equal they're going to delight their customers, and delighted customers are going to make happy stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, that's me, you, CFOs, you hit your revenue targets and things. I'm not just talking about just being happy, it's engaged. So that's the sort of layer I look at. So I have that as my sort of top layer. And I've gone to companies where I've got it completely it's backwards. It's stakeholders, then customers, then employees last, right?
Yep.
I put that as the sort of the layer on top of everything. So that's what I would be communicating as well. But when you talk about sort of the health of the business, I in that layer I put, and it does depend on the business objective and what they're trying to do or what their goal is at that time. It could be consumption, it could just be growth, it could be efficiency. But I always break it down into sort of lagging and sort of leading indicators, and it's nothing crazy. Lagging, revenue margin, utilization. I like to look at that not as the one KPI, but as part of a mix. And churn, customer churn,
Yep.
cost of acquired customers does more on the lagging side, but on the leading, time to value, net NPS. Do these companies want to work with us again? Are we shortening that time to value? Are we delivering that value?
Yep.
And then the traditional ones, forecast hours and customer life value. So I kind of mix it all. So leading and lagging, but I do have EMPS running over the top of that because I think that's something that your workforce can really hold on to. And those different KPIs will mean more to different people depending on their role and things. But that's how I,
Yep.
in general, assess the sort of health and performance of the business when I
No,
come, especially.
no, I like it. I
Lots
like
of KPIs.
No, I like it. I like the fact that you've gone with leading and lagging. I think that's a good way to think about it. I think sometimes we look at metrics a bit one-dimensionally. I think the other thing, one of the things that kind of I'm tuning into, and it was coming off the back of that session the other day, right, that we had in the Services Delivery Alliance on the experience of one of the members with it was Nondus, wasn't it? Where he was talking about how they were on the path to profitability and some of the challenges with transparency, right? Of like how we how and what we communicate, and maybe over communicating too much or communicating it in the right way. So I think one of the things that I'm kind of tuning into is you've got the business is setting targets, right? Like you mentioned, the business is setting targets and the leaders of that business, and it cascades down to managers, but they have targets. So that target might be revenue, it might be ARR, it might be margin, right? There are then KPIs, right, which influence, right, that target, but aren't necessarily, depending on how they're set, a target. So for example, time to value, some companies set that as a target, but others have it as a KPI. And therefore, how those metrics, because they're all metrics, data points, how those are all measured and perceived is quite interesting, because there's a difference between having a target and working towards a KPI, for example. I also think that one of the things that I'm starting to think through is how you fold those KPIs and metrics into like revenue generating areas versus profitability areas, right? Versus customer success, and actually some of the convergence between the two. Because I think time to value is probably, for me, at least in software, the number one, or one of the number one. It's in the top three. And the reason for that is not just because the natural tendency is towards customer success. So they think about it in terms of like that'll influence retention, for example, or expansion revenue, or people buying more. For me, it's a big profitability metric as well, because if you're delivering efficiently, if you've got a target and you're hitting that target, you're pulling the team off that and putting them onto something else. You're not incurring additional cost via overrun, which are all things that eat into your profitability. So I think that there's going to be an interesting kind of evolution of how people think about those metrics, or at least it's something that I want to drive. I don't know what you think about that.
No, it's definitely 100% with you on the time to value. Being an efficient business is a profitable business. I mean, I think last year, if you look at most sort of businesses, that it's all about growth. The year before that, this year is more about efficiencies and you know, doing more with less. Right. Time to value fits in very nicely with that. There's a delay, especially if you're in a consumption business. You're not going to get 100. You know, you're not going to get some, consumption on day one. It takes time to build that up. The shorter you can deliver the client to that state, the more chance you've got to increase consumption. You get your revenue sooner. All sorts. I've seen different takes on time to value. You may have even forwarded me the articles. I think there's a term of time to launch, or is it's a fixed date. So time to value, there's an argument time to value can be subjective. So correct. This whole having a goal or having a target, maybe did you do
for most law? It was me. It was our research. Yeah.
So oh no. Shameless plug.
Well, it showed that there's just this not confusion, but basically most people classify launch as value, right? Yeah. Whereas the client doesn't. And I was talking to a company and they were like, we've been tracking this new metric called surprising churn. I'm like, that's a great name for it. And we found that we're surprised. Why were we surprised? Because we had fast launch times, but it wasn't value. And so, and you're right, value is so very like, you know, obtuse, subjective, whatever you want to call it. And it moves, right? It's like, well, there was the initial reason why maybe we bought, like Precursive. It's generally step one is bring order to the chaos. Everyone's working in spreadsheets. It's a shit show. Let's sort that out. Visibility and control to begin with. What it exposes after about 2 to 3 months is that people haven't got their processes or their governance where they want it to be, because it's throwing up all of this stuff around how do we do stuff? Are we efficient? No, we're not. Why aren't we? And therefore, then there's this tweaking of processes and how it's managed in the tool. And that's like, then you're on to this second value bar moment where they've gone from like, I know what's going on, to how do I improve this using the product? And it's kind of, so I just think it's a moving target. Now, just want to finish on something which is a bugbear for me, and I know you as well. Busy fools. That's my Vijay term. So utilization, we're going to finish on utilization, everyone's favorite PS, one of everyone's favorite PS metric. What do you need to be careful about?
making sure well, there's quite a few things actually. I think it can be misleading if you're not using it. If you're using it in isolation, it's a very blunt tool, right? So billable utilization and there's productive. Productive could be seen as, yeah, you're adding value, and it could be the value that you're talking about, or it could be something else, but it's not earning any money internally. So those are the two types. And I think differentiating can certainly help, because there could be principals, I would expect them to be low billable or lower, but be
Yep.
amplifying the rest of the team. So not productive. So you're increasing the efficiency of the rest of the team. So driving profit there as well. But also, like I said, not all billable work is the same, right? Some could be highly complex and it's undersold, so or it's more hours. So I think it is a case of knowing what you're tracking as well. And again, using utilization on the flip side, right? So high utilization, yeah, great. But are you setting a benchmark? You're not trying to get to 100% because you could kill people, literally stress
Yep.
them out, and you're going to
Yep.
decrease productivity. And then low, people getting bored, or is there another problem? So using utilization as an indicator I would say, is the more mature approach to that layering of KPIs. I think it just points you in the right direction.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yep.
that's my take on it. And it's in every company I've been. It's similar conversations, and it's not always one conversation. It's multiple ones, and and it's great just hearing all the different sort of opinions on how people use it as well. But I've come to use it as one of the indicators on businesses as well. But yeah, let's
Yeah.
not have busy fools and make sure productive utilization is productive.
Yeah.
There you go.
I like it. I like it. Thank you. It's funny because I was looking at something this morning, right? I was looking at so we have this situation where we could potentially do a POC, right?
Mm,
For quite a large company. And the person that would do the work, so I look in Precursive and I can see their utilization. I know they have capacity, but I'm sort of like looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, like, well, this is for next week. So that's relatively short notice. It's not unheard of, right? But I'm like, the bit that I then go and look at is actually what are they doing?
mm,
Because and as it turns out, there's a deployment next week. So the clarity that I want to get, potentially from the individual, potentially from their manager, is more like, do we actually anticipate that deployment will need a little bit more care and attention, and therefore, like going back to some
mm.
contingency? So if I lump in this addition, it's like a day's worth of work that this person would do to set up a
Yeah,
POC, right? So like that's gonna take them from they're about 65% utilized. That's gonna bump them up. And I'm just like, there's this lens of util versus
mm,
what it is. Like, is it sensible? Like, there's this human overlay to it that needs to combine like the availability, like the when with the
yeah,
what, right? And then sort of in the background is like underneath is the margin, of course, right?
that's for you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But no one else cares about that.
So here's
And
the
I've
thing.
almost been thinking about there isn't, I use the phrase like this one dashboard to rule them all, like, I don't know, Lord of the Rings inspired.
Yeah, I had a spreadsheet like that. I
Yeah,
ran a whole business like
right.
that.
And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, it is interesting to try and have everything consolidated in one place. But in a way, some things I do want to segment because I want to look at them in isolation. I don't want to have my view on it colored by profit and margin. I can do that as well. But anyway, that was a bit.
Here's the thing, just on that, because similar thing. So we talked about sort of expected behaviors. And one
Yeah,
thing did at Spectec, I think we called it the money tree or something. I can't remember what I let them name it.
yeah,
But the expected behavior is here's your sort of target to get incentivized. The expected behavior is to look at the resource planner
yeah,
and hunt out work that you could do. That became, that was as a flip. Rather than being assigned, you assign yourself.
yeah,
So it could be that, but again, contingency risk. I think that's part of the maturity of the individual and person, or like you mentioned, the discipline of that resource manager or whoever it is,
yeah.
but doing all those pieces. I think, yeah,
Cool.
conundrum. I hope it's not a Friday deployment.
It is. But that's
Oh wow,
deliberate.
he's got,
That's deliberate for the weekend, I think.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so he's got some bit baked in overtime, right?
Yeah, maybe. That's definitely one to check.
Double bubble.
I appreciate you coming on.
No, it's great being here.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we're going to do a little shameless plug here at the end for the Services Delivery Alliance. So I've started, those listening along who tune into more than one of these shows will have noticed over the last couple I've been mentioning what this is. So we've created, and I'm delighted to say that Vijay, you're one of the founding members of this, along with some others, a network for professional services leaders, which the idea of which is to bring people together to discuss strategy, topics, execution, the shared challenges that everyone faces. I'm just curious to get your feedback on participating in that
I
community
think,
so far.
yeah, no, it's certainly great. I often think that PS is like an island in an organization, and there's lots of material out there. But talking to individuals who've got the same questions or the same issues, and you just looked at it in a different way, and oh, I could use that. And people have reached out to me on LinkedIn and say, oh, how did you do that? And I say, here you go, and it's all free, right? I think that's the beauty of it, and it's a one-stop shop to find out everything you wanted to know about PS or service delivery, but we're afraid to ask, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the beauty of working with peers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of knowledge in that group.
Well, I've got a question I'm going to post in the Slack group, which is all about like the materials of sequencing for selling managed services.
Cool.
Because I'm curious to know, like, is it, do people use proposals up front and then proposals and data sheets, or do they combine it? So check that later on and you can give me a response. But thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your Friday, sir.
Perfect. Speak soon. Take care.